Now, COVID has been wonderfully not at the top of our bulletins for a long time. People in England are living normal lives, save for the odd mask here or there, yet in the last week there has been some cause for concern. Cases, hospitalisations and deaths are rising again. They had been bumping around at what appeared to be societally acceptable levels, yet this rise now seems a little more sustained. And concerningly, rises are profound amongst the over 65s. Worry is starting to set in some sectors. The government is not yet on the edge of opening its winter toolbox, a set of so-called Plan B measures that include vaccine passports. But there are now calls for it to do so. Indeed, calls for it to go further than that. The chief executive of the NHS Confederation, Matthew Taylor, went as far as declaring last night that, and I quote, "The government ought to not just announce we're moving to Plan B, but it should be Plan B+. Well, Plan B+ here clearly refers to deploying more than the toolbox, deploying more non-pharmaceutical interventions, restrictions on people's lives this winter. But is this all too premature? Is this all last year's thinking? Unlike last winter, we now have a fantastic, low-cost pharmaceutical intervention that can both work to prevent the overwhelming of our hospitals and keep us free in our daily lives. The vaccine has in the past and can again take the place of restrictions, allowing us to live normally. Our jabs proved fantastic at reducing cases, hospitalisations and deaths over the last few months, despite a totally open society with as much household mixing as you can get your hands on, with all the joys of human interaction. But we know that vaccines don't last forever. And to some extent, we may be victims of our own success. Jabbing so early means our immunity is waning sooner than much of the rest of the world. And our booster programme is being deployed with nowhere near the urgency of our initial rollout. COVID hasn't gone away, it's still dangerous. Our elderly and our hospitals may still be vulnerable. If we want to keep hospitals from being overwhelmed and therefore keep our society open, we have to put rocket boosters under our booster programme. Well, those are my thoughts, but what can be practically done to speed up the lethargic booster programme? James Lawson is a senior fellow at the Adam Smith Institute and has written papers before on what can be done to speed up vaccine rollouts. Welcome so much to the programme, James. What can be done?
Thank you for having me on the show, Tom. I think your take is very much spot on. The case for lockdowns and for harsh restrictions has very much collapsed. The cost-benefit analysis is completely different when we have access to such effective vaccines. And so we shouldn't really be countenancing this idea of a Plan B. It is no longer proportionate. What we need to do instead is learn how we can live with COVID by boosting the vaccine campaign, by injecting additional resilience, and doing all of that while protecting liberty. The most important thing we've seen in the data when we've done the modelling is that there is a massive vaccine dividend. So even with the level of cases that we have today, hospitalizations and deaths are around 90% lower than for the same amount of cases pre-vaccine in the second wave. So you've got really to the nub of the issue, which is how do we speed up? Right now, the vaccination rate is lower than ever. It's absolutely snail-paced. And that has absolutely nothing to do with supply. There are no excuses for it, really. It is all down to distribution. And fundamentally, at the root of it, is that the government hasn't really made the case for booster shots and hasn't pushed it hard enough and hasn't made it easy enough to go and get those booster shots.
So this is people's fault, really, less so the logistics chains and that sort of distribution infrastructure. This is just people not acting with urgency to take up their jabs when they're offered them.
It's been a continuous theme throughout the campaign that we need to treat it like a war effort. And I think we've grown a little bit complacent. It's not just about booster shots. The most important recommendation we had in our most recent paper for the Adam Smith Institute was about actually redoubling efforts just to vaccinate those in the vulnerable group who have yet to receive their second dose or have yet to receive a dose at all. Now, some of those people don't want to get the vaccine, and I think that's their decision to make. And we were very much anti-vaccine passports. But many of them, if you poll them, actually want to get a vaccine. So that would be my starting point. Go back to those who want a vaccine but who are vulnerable, who missed their second appointment or haven't had one so far. And there are many reasons for that. For example, if they're caring for somebody vulnerable at home, they might not be able to get out as easily, or because they're not near a vaccine centre for various other inconveniences. So firstly, let's redouble efforts to vaccinate those in the phase 1 vulnerable group. It's between 1 and 2 million people still in that group who haven't had their second dose or haven't had any doses but want to have it. That's a crucial thing. They actually want to have it. And then secondly, as you say, it's about making sure we've got that additional resilience with the booster shots. Now, the booster shots are not absolutely essential. You still have a degree of protection even if your antibodies wane, but it's very much a wise thing to do to go out there and get every bit of protection you can. I just don't think we've made the case for that strongly enough. I don't think there's a degree of urgency around it. And to see our vaccination rate plummet, you really have to ask what's gone wrong. And so what we need to do is...
It's disheartening to see that rate plummet. I'm afraid we've come up to the end of the show now, but let's hope that the government installs some more urgency amongst the people of Britain. James Lawson, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick Christys and Mercy Moroki. But first, here are some messages.